Hello and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be considering the theme of guilt in the play Macbeth by William Shakespeare. If I were to define the term guilt, I'd say it's knowing you've done something wrong. Alongside that, it's a regret of what you've done. And more importantly, if we feel that bad about what we've done, we should show something called remorse, and that often manifests itself in wanting to change our actions. But it's important to note with our tragic hero Macbeth, he feels guilt, but he doesn't actually change the course of the path that he's on. He continues to kill and get those around him killed if they stand in the way of his ambition. It's important to note, though, that Macbeth feels guilt for his thoughts and desires in Act 1. By Act 2, Scene 1, before he's actually killed the king, he feels so guilty. He sees a dagger before him, which is acting as a kind of hallucination. It's the first of many things that appear before him that terrify him. By Act 3, Scene 4, he sees an apparition of his best friend Banquo's ghost, the friend he got killed. And this could also manifest itself as a representation of his guilt. It's important to note, though, that early in the play, whilst Lady Macbeth questions her husband's masculinity when he shares his fears and anxieties both before and after killing Duncan, we fail to see any thought from her or dwelling upon the actions they've committed that are sinful. However, by Act 5, Scene 1, we see Lady Macbeth, and her guilt has pushed her over the edge. She can no longer sleep, and she's sleepwalking and hallucinating, and sees blood on her hands that she demands to be removed. At the end of the play, Macbeth loses perspective and instead dwells on having lost, rather than realising why he has been punished for his wrongs. So contextually, Shakespeare intends to illustrate that defying God and going against the divine right of kings and the king himself must have consequences. Perhaps this is because of the gunpowder plot at the time. Perhaps it's because he knew King James would be watching. But both our main characters suffer with the implications of guilt, and the motifs of lack of sleep, inability to cope, eventually, if nothing else for Lady Macbeth, and a huge fall from grace for Macbeth, all stand to represent the implications of guilt. For us, as audience members watching, we understand they are guilty as charged and suffer accordingly. So this is our first quote of several. And it comes from Act 2, Scene 2, and Macbeth says it. "Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand?" And here we have him referring to the mythical Roman god of the seas, Neptune. And he's saying through this metaphor, and exaggeration too, that not even Neptune's ocean could wash the guilt that he wants to be absolved from. And that blood that's clean is a symbol of his guilt that terrifies him. The image of blood seems to be something that really symbolises ongoing and throughout the play that of guilt. He refers to my hand also, and that possessive pronoun signalling to us that he knows his actions are the reason he has to suffer. So why does Shakespeare include this anyway? It's evident to us as audiences now, as it would have been to Jacobean times, that Macbeth's guilt and need for cleaning are bound in the extended metaphor that he's giving. He knows it's impossible to get rid of the guilt he feels, and perhaps Shakespeare does this to accentuate that instant sense of regret that won't go away as the play continues. So he's got an instant regret having just killed Duncan, but as we will see, it doesn't change. Next up is Lady Macbeth in the same scene, where she says to Macbeth, "My hands are of your colour, but I shame to wear a heart so white." The possessive pronoun she uses when she refers to her hands with my actually accentuates how different she is to him. As a side note, later in Act 5, she will refer again to her hands as little, and at that point, her guilt is clear to us, and it implies her vulnerability. Though right now, she definitely doesn't feel any guilt for what they've done. And when she refers to your colour, that second person, your, highlights that they have a shared responsibility in the crimes they've got. They share that colour of the actions they've done. And that also seems to echo later when she talks about outdamned spots in Act 5, Scene 1. So she shares this sense that, yes, I know what we've done. But when she says, I shame, that verb, I shame, it's emasculating her husband once more, something we've seen her do many times already across Act 1. She's reminding him also he needs to manage his anxiety. To her, that's the most demoralising thing about this moment. And when she talks about wearing a heart so white, the verb wearing suggests that he's showing too visibly his intentions and his passions, and that actually when it's so white, the connotations of the colour white both signal purity and, most importantly here, cowardice. So here she's both undermining his power and his masculinity, and he killed the king, just what she asked him to do. So why would we include this quote in an essay? Well, it shows the extent of the manipulation that's going on in their marriage, and it highlights that she at this point does not feel the guilt that he does, as she refuses to dwell on their actions. When we skip forward to Act 3, Scene 2, we realise the guilt has not relented for Macbeth. He says, "Full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." When we think of a scorpion, that noun is a creature that has pincers that are poisonous and can sting. The idea that his mind is full of these creatures suggests he's overwhelmed with his own thoughts, and it amplifies once more his regrets over his actions. When he refers to my mind, that possessive personal pronoun my accentuates his inward struggles and how much he is really relenting the battle that he needs to go through of regretting his actions. He's trying to understand how to cope. When he refers to his dear wife, that adjective dear implies he cares deeply for her and he needs her support at this difficult time. It's important to notice that he confides in her. She does not get that chance herself later in Act 5, when she faces the guilt for the actions they've committed. It shows at this point there is at least some communication in their marriage, which does deteriorate as the guilt permeates in each of them in slightly different ways as the play unfolds. This super quick quote from Act 3, Scene 4, after Banquo's ghost has vanished, "Blood will have blood," from Macbeth, repeats the motif of blood that symbolises violence and guilt across the play. Perhaps Shakespeare is suggesting here that defying God does have consequences, and the verb in the future tense will suggests that we are not done with the bloodbath in this tragedy yet. Blood is also foreshadowing what we see later in Act 5, Scene 1, where Lady Macbeth talks about "out damn spot." That motif comes back. It's the lack of remorse, though, for killing Duncan that did not stop Macbeth at that point killing Banquo and trying to kill Fleance that shows us that he's not actually learnt the message that he's sharing about blood having blood. And most importantly, it proves that Macbeth is aware of his downfall and how he's up against it because he has gone against God. It's important to note that he will go back to the witches seeking more information, trying to move on from his guilt in Act 4. But it's important to remember that this has happened just after Banquo's ghost has vanished. And that represents another manifestation of Macbeth's guilt. As we skip on to Act 5, Scene 1, Lady Macbeth says all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. And the exoticism and beauty behind the smells that shield a bad odour with the perfumes of Arabia are quite a feminine image of sophistication from Lady Macbeth. But that femininity actually unveils her vulnerability. And she refers to sweetening, highlighting how much her actions are unforgivable in her own eyes now, and how much that guilt is clearly playing on her mind. When she refers to her little hand, the innocence of the adjective little in its diminutive, that means small form, implies she is now a hollow of her former self. There's no glory in her hands now, they are little. It's a real crude awakening from way back when in Act 1, Scene 5, where she says, "Fill me with direst cruelty from the crown to the toe top." We see a much more powerful and uninhibited woman here. And it's important to notice that by this point in the play, in Act 5, Scene 1, that woman is gone. Now it's emphasising how she can't get rid of the ill feelings that come from her actions and have hit her hard. She resents, it would seem, her former, more powerful, unfeminine self. When she says, "Out, damn spot, out, I say," the quote that's probably the most overused in the play when we're referring to guilt, she can't shake it off. The repetition of "out," that commanding, doesn't neglect the fact that she knows there is no way out. Just like Macbeth and the dagger in Act 2, Scene 1, when she sees blood on her hands, in most play versions, directors choose for there to be no blood on her hands, to prove once more this is another hallucination, another manifestation of the guilt. And finally, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player, says Macbeth in Act 5, Scene 5. His metaphor of life as a walking shadow echoes the notion that he is a dead man walking now. This notion of him being a poor player also, is this because he's played with God? In some ways, the divine right of kings has been challenged, and he is an absolute loser because of it. It's important to note that by this point, news of Lady Macbeth's death has just been shared, and he's lost complete perspective and his main influencer and companion. And he says she would have died hereafter. He has a very dismissive attitude. His guilt has gone, and his sense of remorse is non-existent. Whilst Macbeth seems to be reflecting on his life, I wonder, is this him displaying guilt? Or is it really just about knowing you've lost? I wonder if the main focus of this quotation is rather that it's relevant because his tragic downfall and guilt are implied, even if the remorse is not clear anymore. Undeniably, guilt is a huge theme across this play. And whether you were to dabble with a pivotal moment, like the apparition of Banquo's ghost in Act 3, Scene 4, or you were to steadily use and apply the quotations in this video, I hope that the confidence you have applying those quotations with closed language analysis and considering audience reactions is all the more present based on this. Good luck. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?